Hello guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to be discussing a character analysis of Sarah and how she is linked to the current zeitgeist of heteropessimism in the current social climate in the African community, specifically the Southern African one, since this is a South African Netflix original. So yeah, let's get into it. So in the case of Sarah is definitely someone who has sort of dealt with the brunt of Jonas's very like narcissistic manipulative ways, and also through means of triangulation. He tends to triangulate Sarah with his other children who he deems more legitimate in the world, simply because he views the wives that those children are born from as status symbols and people who can basically uplift him socially in the social hierarchy. And we see the attachment to power that Sarah has and the ways in which she uses sex as a way to sort of infringe her desire for power and control over her life onto other people. We see this in her interactions with Magesh. We see this in her, basically taking Bongani from Mpume. Justice for Mpume for that one, because that was very foul on her part. We see this in the ways in which she sort of expresses desire to sort of use um her sexuality and sensuality as a way to not only control the men in her life but also control herself. She wants to assert and make decisions that not only concern her but also make her feel fulfilled, and she feels as though a lot of the time she takes after her father, in the sense that she often tries to do that by way of having relationships or having sex with other people. And she often projects her desire for control and assertiveness onto Mpume, because Mpume is sort of like a mirror opposite of her life. She is the projection of what her life could have been had she just been born from the right woman. And that sort of adds a double binding tragedy to her character and sort of expresses the amount of rejection that she feels internally inside, since she constantly has to compete and compare herself to Mpume. With Sarah, I feel a lot of sympathy for her because she is also just a teenage girl. However, I do like how messy she was written in the show. I like the fact that the showrunners did not try and portray her as some sort of like pseudo adult who just knew the right things to say and the right things to do at the right time. That's not the case. Sarah was acting out, and she acted like someone who has gone through what she's gone through, which is someone who often portrays herself as a person who is just trying to have some sense of control over her life. And she often projects that onto the nearest target that she deems as closest to her. And that is sort of the dynamic that she has with the other people in her life. We also see a very strained relationship with her mom, when her mom ends up sending her to the Sangoma after she has a dispute with Jonas about, I'm assuming it's a ceremony that is participated with, like a father-daughter sort of thing, almost like a quinceañera, but not really. But point is that she wanted to do a homecoming ceremony with her father, and Jonasi refused. And she was like, you know what, I'm tired, I'm gonna tell the whole world that Jonasi is my father. And then Jonasi was like, Essie, you need to deal with your daughter, because I know she's acting up, she's crashing out. And then she ends up sending her daughter to a Sangoma, and the Sangoma says, girl, okay, your mom is male centered, okay, focus on yourself, because she's never ever gonna change for that. For you, she's only ever going to do whatever that man says. That's just the honest truth. Please just focus on yourself. There's no curse here, it's just your mom being a dumbass. And I sort of like giggled when that happened, because that's honestly so real. um in the ways in which, like, a lot of people sort of like assume that like everything bad in your life is because someone is trying to hex you. No, sometimes you just make decisions that are unfavorable, and You have to bear with the consequences. It's not a curse. It's not someone hexing you. It's not someone bewitching you or whatever. It's just a sign that you have not been making good decisions. That's it. And I really appreciate that detail. And how her character is linked to heteropessimism is basically how sex is often used as a means of coping with the lack of control that a lot of women feel in their lives. For a lot of women, sex with men is the only ways in which they get to feel validated and assertive in the bedroom. And I say assertive in a very loose term because we still have patriarchal standards of how women should be when it comes to having intimacy with men. But I mean in the sense of psychology, because the psychological effects of sex often portrays one as like somebody who basically has control over their body and their urges and is able to pick, choose, and refuse who they get to sleep with at what time. And that level of power and control is enticing to anyone who feels lost in life. That's why it is often portrayed in the show whenever someone is going through a very mentally taxing time. It also just so happens to align with the time that they want to have sex. I'm not saying it's right, but I am saying it's quite accurate to what happens in real life. Because for a lot of people, sex is not really a thing that they enjoy doing. No, it's actually the psychological products of it that's what they get a thrill out of. They like feeling empowered, they like feeling desired, they like feeling dominant, they like feeling submissive. Whatever feeling you get from your desirable outcome of sex, that is what you're chasing. You're not really chasing the physiological sensations itself, because anyone can make you come, but not everyone can make you feel like a big, strong, dominant person. Not everyone can make you feel submissive and small and protected. Not everyone can do that. So when you do find that, you end up getting addicted to it and wanting to constantly chase that high. And sometimes that's often a mirror to hypersexuality in a lot of cases in both men and women. However, with women, I say that it is often sort of indicative of the fact that relationships with men tend to be unsatisfactory, and women try and sort of dangle the coochie as a way to sort of assert themselves after being romantically denied and rejected by the men that they desire. And then this coincides with the dreaded situationship conversation. Now, with Sarah's situation, I don't think she ever had a situationship in the show from what I know. However, I do think that we can get some points as to how a person like her would be susceptible to a situationship because of the nature of how she tends to cope with sex and how she has a very jaded relationship with power and power dynamics, as well as secrecy and rejection. In conclusion, I would say Sarah is indicative of coping with the lack of power and influence a lot of women feel when it comes to having some form of equal exchange with men, or just relationships with men in general. And the dreaded idea that a relationship with a man means that you have to subdue yourself or have to constantly bear with rejection in order for you to cope with it. And I think that Sarah's character is one that explores this quite eloquently, but obviously from a more surface level standpoint, I had to add some meat to this analysis in order for me to link it to heteropessimism. But I'm quite intrigued by her character, I will say, to the least. Well, I will say to the you know what I meant. But yeah, have a nice day.